Hello and welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. Our topic today is how can a business owner better develop their successor? My name is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host Walter Dial of Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman CPAs located in Bethesda, Maryland. Walter's a CPA, Certified Valuation Specialist, Certified Financial Planner, and Certified Exit Planner, and he is the Tax Practice Partner at GR&F. Walter, how are you doing?
I'm glad to be here, Pat. Thank you very much.
If you could take a minute here at the outset and just describe your practice. You and I, we work together, serving clients together. We're both certified exit planners. We both do exit planning. But describe your practice, and then also why you think this topic that we're going to be talking to Michael about today, why do you think it's an important topic for business owners?
Okay, thanks. So as you already mentioned, I'm a partner at Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman, a CPA firm in Bethesda, Maryland. I head up our exit planning and business valuation group. We work very closely with closely held business owners to help them devise and execute their optimum exit strategies. And as you mentioned, we've worked on several cases together. It's always been a pleasure working with you. I think one of the main reason why this topic is important is a distinction you always make when you're working with business owners, and that distinction is between business value and transferable value. And I think that's a critical distinction because to the extent that the business value rests solely or mostly in the talents and abilities of the business owner, the business will never have the highest possible transferable value. So to the extent that a successor or even a key employee group can be developed, transferable value will increase. And as you know, an increase in transferable value increases the likelihood of a successful exit. So I think this is a very, very important topic. I'm glad Michael's here to speak with us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We do talk about that. At the heart of transferable value is this issue of succession. Just last week, I met with a gentleman who has built a very profitable business with a great reputation. His goal is to sell in the next 2 years, but he realizes that not having a successor in place will more than likely impact what someone is willing to pay him for the business. Because as you know, Walter, most often it is important to a financial or strategic buyer that there's someone in place to lead and run the business once the owner is gone. So let's introduce our guest today, Michael Beck, President of Eliciting Excellence, and he is passionate about bringing out the best in others through executive coaching and strategic development. With 35 years of domestic and international experience, he has served a wide range of clients from many industries, including manufacturing, professional services, technology, healthcare, financial services, and not-for-profit. He has a BS and a master's in engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from Wharton. He has held executive positions as CEO, COO, CFO, and VP of Business Development. He also spent several years overseas as a business consultant to the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Michael, sorry, there's nothing royal here today about Walter and I, but we're quite excited to have you with us today on the podcast to discuss this very important topic. And I want to thank you in advance for helping us better understand how to address this critical issue of succession.
Well, first of all, Pat and Walter, thanks so much for having me as a guest today. I really appreciate it. And as you've explained, I am passionate about helping people succeed. And I've been working with leaders for about 18 years now. And it's just something I enjoy doing, and my clients like the work as well. So, to add to the insights that you and Walter shared about the importance of successor development as it relates to both the inherent value and the transition value of a business, I see another aspect as well that keeps me excited about the work that I do or that we do. Typically, on an internal sale, the business owner doesn't get paid up front by their child or one of the key managers or group of folks. They get paid from future cash flow. And so if the successor fails, not only does the business owner not get paid the money that they thought they were going to receive, but they typically have to come out of retirement fix the problem and try to resell the business. And so I think it's critical to fully develop the successors so they do succeed.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And we do see that from time to time where a business owner has left, thought they've retired. They've transferred the business either to key employees or children, and it can work out the way you just put it forth. What we have noticed is that, or observed, is that the key employees may have been key employees and very good at that, but they didn't turn out to be good owners. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit too, as to, what's the difference between a real strong key employee who was actually running the business and doing it quite well, maybe even when the owner was on a long vacation, but didn't turn out to be a great owner once they were given the chance.
That's a great observation, because if you stop and think about it, up until the point of the transition, all those folks have only probably ever been employees, and they don't think like an owner. They don't view things as an owner normally does. And there actually are a number of important distinctions between how an owner thinks and how an employee thinks. Employees, and I'm generalizing, of course, but employees tend to think a bit more narrow than an owner. An owner has to think broadly. In other words, employees tend to want to do a really good job in the area within the company that they're in, and they do a good job. The problem is, as an owner, they need to consider all aspects of the business. Not only do they have to think about what's going on within the company, but if an owner is going to be successful, they need to be mindful of things going on all around with their competitors, with the economy, and they've got to make wise decisions with that depth of understanding. It's pretty important for an owner to have vision, and you can't have that vision without that bigger, broader picture. There's so many distinctions between employees and owners. As an employee, if you don't do a good job, if you make a poor decision, if the company doesn't do well, you just go and get another job. But as an owner, you can't afford to be casual about decisions. So there are a number of those important distinctions. The distinction between thinking tactically and thinking strategically. So many employees are great at tactics. In other words, you give them direction and they can execute it brilliantly. They can manage a team, manage resources. The problem is, as an owner, you need also to think strategically. You need to think about a general direction for the company or solving a bigger problem, the core problem. And it's not so much about execution. Of course, that's obviously important, but you really need to foresee some issues either that are coming up or that are on the plate right now. And so this whole idea of thinking strategically is pretty critical.
So, Michael, you just mentioned vision. You mentioned thinking strategically, thinking tactically, managing rather than leading. Are these the kind of things or issues common that you see with successors or potential successors?
Absolutely. There are things. See, what I've found is that owners tend to feel they've developed a successor well when they've talked to the mechanics of the business. In other words, how the business runs. The problem is knowing how the business runs doesn't help them become good leaders necessarily. It makes them good managers, but not necessarily leaders. It also doesn't hone their judgment. And so without sound judgment, mistakes tend to happen. And so this whole mindset of an owner about having good judgment, balancing risk and reward, long-term perspective versus a short-term win are all really important. And those aren't developed when an owner only works on helping a successor understand the mechanics.
Michael, when we're talking to a client about this issue, and we're talking about a potential successor, or someone who's already kind of in the role and they're trying to help them along. We'll use these two categories, talent and temperament. We might say something like this. We might say, you know what, it sounds like and actually it's been proven that your key employee here has the talent and the skills to do what you do, because you can take a 6-month vacation and the place still runs real well. However, have you done any work to figure out or calculate whether or not they have the temperament to be an owner? In other words, own all the risk, as an example, like you just referred to a few minutes ago. Are those two good categories to think about, or are there different ones that you would suggest or additional ones?
It's a good way to make that distinction between owners and non-owners. I kind of go back to the concept of managing versus leading. And managing is about really dealing with resources, whether they're people or things. But leading is about inspiring. It's about, like you say, as an owner, that they need to have not an appetite, but they have to appreciate the risk that's involved and think of it in longer term aspects. And so that temperament, the temperament of making decisions without all the information, about being aware and mindful of what's going on externally, you need to have that. Not everybody can take on that responsibility. I mean, as an owner, there's some uncertainty in the future, and a lot of folks can't deal with uncertainty. They like the certainty of a paycheck, and kind of the corollary to that is if the paycheck begins to go away, they just find a new job. Whereas an owner, that you don't have that luxury. You've got to make it work. And so not everyone's cut out for that, and you can't, unless you sort of throw them into that or get them to think in those terms. Unfortunately, they become owners and then realize too late that they're not of that temperament.
So it sounds like, in your experience, would you say that it's easier to take someone who has the temperament of an owner and teach them the necessary skills to manage the business, as opposed to vice versa, trying to take a manager and train them how to become an owner?
It's certainly easier to take someone who has an inclination to be an owner and take responsibility, and then have them come up to speed on any, what we'll call it industry knowledge, technical knowledge, process knowledge. That's pretty easy to do. Like you've observed, the harder thing is to get somebody who knows the mechanics and get them to switch over to an ownership mindset. And because, like you said, not everybody has the penchant for that. They don't have the wherewithal to become an owner and deal with all that uncertainty or all that responsibility. Owners realize that it's not only their paycheck that's on the table here, it's the livelihood of everyone that works for the company. That's a big responsibility. Not everyone's up for that. And so you're absolutely right. It's far easier to take someone who has a penchant for that and get them up to speed on other things than it is to take someone who's knowledgeable about the industry but is not really cut out to be an owner.
And in your experience, would you say that someone who's a good manager but not cut out to be an owner, do you think they kind of know that deep down, and it is possible maybe to bring someone else in to take over the business and keep them in their position, or even elevate someone else above them that's already there?
That's a good question. And the problem is that not everybody appreciates what it takes to be an owner. And many, many, many people fantasize about owning a company and not having to answer to anybody but themselves, and they want to be in that role. They just don't realize what it really entails. And so I think, unfortunately, if you were to ask most of those people, do you think you could be a good owner, most folks would answer yes. I don't think they would really appreciate what's involved. And so because of that, if you were to deny somebody the role of owner and bring in someone from the outside, I suspect there would be hard feelings.
Michael, some of these issues that you've mentioned, why would you say they're so common?
Well, I think they're common for a couple of reasons. The one, and they're actually both pretty important. The one is one we've talked about already, where just developing somebody so they understand how a business works doesn't help them develop the leadership and ownership skills they need. And so if an owner really wanted to properly develop a successor, they really need to help them develop leadership, develop an ownership mentality, help hone their judgment so they're making smart decisions. The other issue, and this I think is unfortunately too common, is that many owners really have a hard time giving up control. And what happens is they run the company, and make all the decisions until it's time to transition, and then they let go. And the problem with that, of course, is that if you don't allow the successor to start making decisions and probably make some mistakes, you can't, as an owner, correct those mistakes, correct their thinking, help them appreciate some of the nuances of being an owner. And so I think many times successors are unprepared because the owner hasn't really given them the opportunity to develop. I think along with that is that I really think owners need to share their wealth of experience. Typically, the people who own these companies have built it from nothing, taken it over, learned some hard lessons along the way. And to them, the lessons are self-evident. But to someone else, those lessons are not self-evident. And I think unless they help them understand the mistakes that they made, the owner themselves made in the past, the lessons they learned from it, that successor is kind of doomed to repeat that. So I think those are the causes for it. Now, how do you get past that? Well, again, there are a couple of things. On the owner's end, they need to start allowing them to make those decisions. And obviously, you don't put the reins of the company over and have them make poor decisions. So you start off with decisions that, if they get it wrong, it's not terribly damaging, so that they can begin doing two things: assessing the level of judgment and whether they're thinking strategically, and then secondly, help them make decisions smarter. And by doing that, you groom that aspect of this potential successor. Of course, like we said, helping to share the mistakes that have been made so that they don't make the same mistakes. There's no need for them to make those mistakes. And often, at the size of the company that often exists when they're taking over, some of those missteps will really submarine the company. And so you really want to do the best you can do to help them avoid those mistakes. There's one more aspect I think that an owner can emphasize to help ensure the success of the company. Culture in a company, I think, is really important. And there's a saying that culture eats strategy for lunch. And what that means is that even with a good strategy, the results are only as good as how well it gets executed. And the determining factor for how well it gets executed is the culture of the company. And the culture drives engagement drives execution, and of course execution drives results. And study after study has shown that companies with low engagement and we'll call it a culture by default, in other words, it's not designed, it just happens, their results are far below, almost an order of magnitude below companies' results where the culture is strong, it's supportive, people are highly engaged, and they just get great results. And so I think it's important for the owner to help the successor appreciate the role that culture plays in the success of the company.
So this is also a good argument.
The other thing, I'm sorry?
I was going to say this is also another good reason to get your plan in place early so you have time to do things like this as far as getting the manager up to speed with running the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It elevates the person from a manager up to a leader. See, I mean, we can get into culture. We could spend an hour talking about culture, but in a nutshell, many people will say that the culture of a company are the values and the behaviors that the company aspires to. But in fact, the culture of a company is made up of the values and behaviors that the company tolerates. And if you think about it, the people that do the tolerating are the leaders. And so if the leaders aren't very clear about what the culture is, and they live that culture and they don't tolerate a deviation from the culture, then things go astray. And so if you want to, like you've said, if you want to elevate someone from a manager to a leader, that's an important component. The other half of this is developing leadership competencies above and beyond management competencies. And it's a developmental issue. I personally, I believe there's no such thing as leadership training. You can't train someone to be a better leader. You can't read a book and all of a sudden you're a better leader. It's developmental. It takes time, and it takes somebody to point out blind spots. It takes someone to give course corrections. And I mean, this is what we do, what I've done for a living for 18 years. And the challenge is most executives, most owners, truly both don't have the time to do what it takes, nor the expertise. And so we're obviously big advocates of bringing in a professional to help with the leadership competency development.
Michael, with a new client engagement for you, if the client asks you this question, how long do you think this is going to take to develop my successor? How do you answer that?
I do answer that. And the answer generally is 6 to 12 months. And I'll tell you why. Of course, from my experience, that tends to work. If they're coming along as a leader and they're changing those behaviors and improving those competencies, very, very often you see it within 6 months. You see a great improvement, and then maybe for the next 6, refinement of that. And on the alternative, within 6 months, sometimes even within 3 months, it becomes painfully evident that this person is not the right person. And we've had that experience as well, where we just call it 3 months and say, you know what, you need a different solution. This is not going to work. And what we'll always do is start these off with a good objective assessment, a 360 assessment, because it's really hard for the leader, for sure, and often the owner, because they're too close to this, to have a full appreciation of what this person's leadership strengths are and their weaknesses are. And so an assessment is a good starting place. It's objective, and it gives us all a pretty clear focus as to what to work on over these months.
You know, we've been talking about the successor, but we're aware, and you've referenced it today, Michael, how the owner actually needs to change as well.
Yes.
And their role needs to change. But I'm just wondering, do you work with the owners as well, and what does that look like?
Thank you for asking. We do. It really is. We want everyone to succeed. We want the transition to go well, and we want it to be a great success. We want the value to be high. We want the successor to win. And so as part of the package that we always go in with, we'll have monthly strategy sessions with the owner on how they can best mentor the successors so that along with the work that we do, their work complements that, and that successor really gets a well-rounded development. And that helps ensure success. Because there are certain things only an owner can do. I mean, only an owner can share their past mistakes and their lessons learned, for instance. Only an owner can say, yes, you make this decision. We can't do that. So I think it's sort of a partnership in that way.
Does your process for helping the owner look different than helping a successor?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because the successor, we're developing competencies. And so we'll meet with the successor on a weekly basis. But the owner, we're not developing the owner. We're strategizing with the owner on what they can do to help further the development of the successor. So that we'll strategize with the owner on the kinds of decisions maybe that they can help them make, or the idea we can help them appreciate the importance of letting go a little bit and starting to give the successor more autonomy. And the successor, you see, the successor will share with us the things that come to their mind, the areas that, or the challenges or the struggles they're having. But the owner may see other things that the successor is not talking about. So the owner can share with us, I see this now, now that I'm more mindful, I see this challenge or their shortcoming. Is there any way you can help them improve that? And so it really is a partnership in that way. We're both helping the successor succeed.
Are there any last thoughts or pieces of advice or anything else that you would say here in closing?
I guess if there were some final thoughts, I think many times a good place to start is with an assessment so that everyone can see in an objective fashion whether the person or the people they're considering as successors really have the potential for rising to the occasion. And then based on that, decide whether to invest in developing them. We've had cases where it absolutely did not work and it was a bad idea, and others where the person was a rock star and it was perfect. And so a good place to start is simply with an assessment. And so if someone's not sure, or they think they're sure, or they can't decide among several people as to who really should have the top spot, doing that for all of them is a good way to make an objective and not so much of an emotional decision.
So listeners, that makes sense, doesn't it? Get started with an assessment of your potential successor. Having a fully developed successor is essential for whatever exit route you choose, as we heard today from Michael. An internal sale to insiders or children, a sale to a third party or an ESOP, or even as an absentee owner. Your successor will need to be a leader like you who inspires others, has sound judgment, understands and appreciates the risk involved with owning a business. They will also need to understand how important culture is in driving employee engagement and executing on strategy. They will need not just training on the mechanics, but development as a leader and owner, and all of that takes time. But you can get started today with an assessment, and Michael can help you with that. His website is michaeljbeck.com. His email address is mbeck@michaeljbeck.com, and his phone number is 503-928-7645. Michael, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Your advice will certainly serve business owners who tune in. Walter, thank you as well. Our goals for this podcast are simple. We want to provide helpful information on building transferable value and planning your successful exit, and we want to increase awareness of the need to prepare now before you're actually ready to exit. If you found this information helpful, please consider sharing it on social media. And check out our website, nslp.com, and our services. Contact us for any help you might need with building transferable value, staying in control of your exit, and leaving your desired legacy. Thank you, folks. Until next time, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners signing off.